Welcome, everyone, to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. This is former County Executive Steve Levy welcoming you to the show. This is a live call-in show, folks. It's a dreary day out there, so if you are listening to the radio, whether at home or in the car, of course, make sure you're calling legally from the car. We want you to join in the conversation. We're at 451-1039. The 1039 is the same setting on your FM dial, 103.9. You can also listen to us on LongIslandNewsRadio.com. And we're going to have an exciting show for you today. We're going to have, in the second segment, Michael Watt calling in from the Long Island Gasoline Retailers. He's going to be talking about a proposal in Suffolk County that relates to credit card purchases versus cash purchases at the pump. We're also going to have, in the second hour, Richard Young, who is one of the attorneys on the Young and Young radio show right here on LA News Radio. They have a fantastic show. I'm an attorney by training myself, and I learn a great deal from these guys, and you can too. But Richard is going to be joining us in the second half after 3 o'clock. Very opinionated guy, outspoken, very colorful. And in that same hour, Larry Levy is going to be calling in about the state budget, about segregation on Long Island. Larry, if you know the name, was prior to his present stint a editorial board member in Newsday, and now works in the Hofstra School of Suburban Studies. He will deny the fact that he's a liberal, but he's a big lib, and he's going to call in just the same to give us his scoop on what's going on the state budget. And Rich Young will have a different perspective on that, and we hope to be insightful, educational, and most of all, accessible. So please call us in. The first 20 minutes of my show, I usually rant off about a few things, and then we open it up to calls in the second half hour, starting at 2:30. So let me start off by retracing my steps to what I said last week. I opened up last week's show lamenting about the fact that the president, in dealing with Vladimir Putin and the aggression that we've seen in Eastern Europe, was so tepid, primarily because he made the cardinal sin. It's Politics 101. Political International Studies 101, malpractice. You never say we are taking military options off of the table. That's what he did. Now, I don't want a military encounter. You probably don't want a military encounter. We're war-weary. Afghanistan, Iraq, enough. We want to start dealing with our domestic issues. But now you're dealing with a tyrant, a thug, whose biggest lament over the last century, in his mind, is the fact that the old Soviet Union, the evil empire, had disintegrated, and he's definitely on the path toward reassembling it. And what do we do in response? We basically say, go ahead, because you'll feel no pain. We already told you up front we won't do anything about it militarily. If that doesn't embolden Putin, what will? To say, oh, well, we're going to take your 10 biggest billionaires and cut them off from the American economy. Big deal. He's laughing at this. In fact, you gave these guys such a foreshadowing that whatever assets they had in American banks, they withdrew weeks ago. So this isn't serious. The Europeans can't get their act together because they're so dependent on Russian oil, which is another thing that we should be talking about, and why our president has to encourage more domestic searching for both oil and natural gas. But then we had a speech this week where I thought the president was going to have a chance to redeem himself. Maybe it was just a faux pas, a gaffe, that he said that military options are off the table. And he gave this speech to the G7, and I was listening to it live, and I have to say, he was great for 90% of that speech. I was looking at him captivated, as were these leaders from the G7. This was the Obama that rose to prominence, from a state senator to United States senator to president of the United States in very short time, with this brilliant, soaring oration. And he had them. He was beautifully distinguishing the values of Western democracies versus the tyranny of Putin's world. And then he blew it again. What did he say that wrecked all of that wonderful speech? He said, there is no expectation they will be dislodged by force. Now, even if you're thinking that, Mr. President, you don't say it. A couple of pundits over the last week in ruminating over this had said, Richard Nixon back in the day would tell Henry Kissinger when he goes into his discussions with world leaders, whether it's China, Russia, whoever it might be, he would tell Henry, let these guys know that I'm a little off, that I'm a little tilted in the head, that I'm a hothead, I'm a cowboy. You can't control me. You want to do X, Y, and Z, but you never know what I'm going to do. That was an attempt to keep the opposition on their toes, always weary that if they did X, there was going to be pushback with Y. So the message we're sending to Putin is go in, no pain. The message we send to our allies is you better have nukes, because if you don't have nukes, you may be a sitting duck. Just ask Mubarak or Gaddafi that didn't have nuclear power to deter aggressors. And then you look at Assad in Syria, who probably doesn't have nuclear arms, but certainly did have chemical weapons. He used them, and he's the guy who's still standing. It's really sad that we are not taking more action, even if you don't want to go militarily. The president had unilaterally halted missile buildup in Eastern Europe, in Poland, even in the Ukraine. The Ukrainians gave up their nuclear armaments on the trust that Russia was going to be a very docile neighbor, and the West would be there to stick up them. Even though they weren't a part of NATO, there was an understanding that you're going to be part of the Western democracies and we'll be there for you. And our response is, we're going to cut off the assets from 10 billionaires in Russia. Not enough. I guess the president wants to go further, and he's stymied somewhat by European allies who are wishy-washy. They're so dependent on that oil. But you can't take the military option off the table. It's one of the reasons why, I had to veer away from the Democratic Party. People often ask me, you were a Democrat for so long, why did you leave? And I would always say because I was a JFK Democrat, not a Ted Kennedy Democrat. And what's the difference? I'll tell you, the difference was brilliantly laid out by Bill O'Reilly in a Newsday article on the web. Not the Bill O'Reilly from Fox. There is another Bill O'Reilly who's a columnist who writes regularly for Newsday. And I'll tell you, if you haven't read his stuff, folks, it is insightful. It is fantastic. It is probably the best commentary for conservative thought, Republican conservative thought in New York State than you'll find anywhere. He and Ed Cox are tremendous advocates. And you don't have to agree with it. You could say, hey, he's all wet. This is nonsense. You could be liberal. You could be a Democrat and say this is wrong. But he articulates it very well. And what he said was, we're coming up on the 10th anniversary of Ronald Reagan's death. And when we do, all the pundits and the liberal media are going to be talking about Ronald Reagan could not be elected today in a Republican primary. The Republicans have gone so far to the right that he could not be elected. O'Reilly disputes that. I happen to think that that they might be right, these critics. Some of these guys are way to the right, like Rick Santorum, who is in a different world when it comes to his social politics, and Rand Paul, who is a libertarian who is far beyond where the base is in the Republican Party, let alone the general public, and Ted Cruz, who wants to shut down the government to get his point across. So there are problems in the Republican Party with the extreme right. On the other hand, what O'Reilly says, and by the way, I've been in contact with O'Reilly. We're hoping to have Bill O'Reilly, the columnist in Newsday, not the Bill O'Reilly from Fox, on our show in either next week or the week thereafter. This is what he writes about John Kennedy. How do you think John Kennedy would fare in today's Democratic Party? Okay, and then he says, in the world of Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Bill de Blasio and Barack Obama and Harry Reid, he would lose a Democratic primary. Look at some of the quotes that are attributed to JFK. Quote, "The ever-expanding power of the federal government, the absorption of many of the functions that states and cities once considered to be responsibilities of their own, must now be a source of concern." Then he says, the soundest way to raise revenues in the long run is to cut taxes. Every dollar released from taxation that is spent or invested will help create a new job. This was a Democrat, John Kennedy, saying this in the 1960s. Okay, he got it. Business was good for America. You can't overregulate, you can't overtax. But the thing that was most eye-opening, which most educated people know about, is JFK actually ran to the right of Richard Nixon when it came to fighting communism, when it came to defending Western democracies and Western freedom. And what did he say? We have to be prepared militarily. He said, pursue peace, the Bible tells us, and we shall pursue it with every effort and every energy that we possess. But it is an unfortunate fact that we can secure peace only by preparing for war. This is John Kennedy, not saying let's get into a war, and we could talk about Vietnam all we want. That was escalated dramatically by Lyndon Johnson. But the premise is there that if you don't show China and the Soviet Union that you're willing to stand up to their aggression, you will lose the Cold War. We won the Cold War because we were at least willing to take a stand. We don't want to go to war with Putin. No one is saying that. But you have to be strong and you have to show strength to preserve the peace. Hopefully that word is out there. So, Mr. President, what we can be doing is expanding our natural gas searches, and that's being done on private lands, folks, not in the public sphere. Expanding our oil exploration. Stopping the opposition to Keystone. Yes, we're drilling more. We are getting more. But again, that's all private in spite of the overregulation from the federal government. And, he's learning you can't close Guantanamo. We shouldn't be surrendering the internet to the international community. Let's stay strong. Okay, that's my diatribe on foreign affairs for the moment. Let me shift gears here right now for the next half of this segment. And we're going to want you to call in at 451-1039 in our second segment. I want to shift gears locally. We had news here in Suffolk County. There was a downgrading of Suffolk's bonds over the last week. Moody's investors said that the financial shape of county finances was degrading, and they implemented a downgrade. Two other investment houses remained unchanged. But Moody's said they're dropping the bond rating. And, of course, what was the first reaction from the Malone administration was, it's not our fault. It was the other guy's fault. It was the guys before me. And, I guess maybe you can get away with that in the first month, the first year of a new administration. But at some point, when you're in the second half of your term, there has to be some responsibility. There has to be some ownership of what is going on. And in fact, there was an article in Newsday by a columnist who has sometimes written positively about me, sometimes negatively about me. She did say the same thing, that, enough. The words from Moody's was in the present tense when they said, there's too much borrowing. There's too many one-shots going on. Of course, the reaction from the Malone administration was, we've stopped all the one-shots now. We've reduced the size of the government, and everything is going to be honky-dory and rosy, and Moody's was, making a big mistake there. Well, let's understand why it was in the present tense. The reason Moody's was so negative is the actions that were taken by the present administration, one being selling off the Dennison building. The Dennison building is that big white building on Vets Highway, 12, 13 stories high. And we owned it free and clear. We don't pay rent on that. The county, in a desperate attempt to get money, sold it, claiming they were going to get $70 million for it. and then we're going to lease it back, pay rent to stay in that building. It is ridiculously bad policy, but it was implemented. And on top of that, they have a deficit because they estimated $70 million coming in. They may get about $26 million instant deficit there. They've been bonding salaries, something never done in county history before. There's a settlement that comes from, not a settlement, but an arbitration award for corrections. They don't pay for it as they go, as has always been the case. They bonded it for the first time ever. It's like taking a credit card and paying for your groceries that way and letting interest accumulate. Then they said, let's defer our debt. We have a debt obligation that we have to pay out every month, but we're going to stop paying it. You know, you say things like that, it scares the heck out of the rating agencies. Then you had a PBA contract, the police union contract, that was backloaded. Yeah, there were a couple of zeros in the first year or two, but it's backloaded to the point where the Budget Review Office says, we don't know if we're going to be able to pay for this. It is so expensive. The other misnomer out there, which Moody's didn't buy, was this story that the new administration had cut all these positions out. Those positions were cut out in my final year in office, where we put in for the closing of the nursing home. And to the credit of the new administration, they did change positions and actually close it, which was important. But those positions were already taken out of the budget when I submitted the 2012 budget. And then there were several hundred more employees that we said we're going to cut if the union does not agree to start paying for health care benefits. Those health care benefits are rising exponentially, and there's not a dime of contribution from present employees. Eventually, there were new employees who were going to start paying, but for the 10,000 present employees, they continue to pay zero. And that is one of the reasons why you have this structural imbalance. And it's not something that is germane just to Suffolk County. In fairness, this is happening everywhere in municipalities. You have, even if you get a 2% increase in taxes or 3% or 4%, which people cannot afford, when you have pension costs that are going up by 15, 20, 25% a year, when you have health care costs going up by sometimes 4%, sometimes 10%, sometimes 15% a year, and you're getting no contribution from employees for that, you can see it's no wonder you're going to run a structural shortfall every year. The PBA, all right, there's so much money. It is so costly in the police department. This is something Rich Young will talk about when he comes in here at 3 o'clock. He was a New York City officer, and he says, they can't fathom the kind of money that's spent in Suffolk County. The money is just enormous. So when you're having these trickling of dollars coming in from other venues for more revenue, but you have an exponential increase in these costs, which are endemic to most local governments these days, you're going to have shortfalls, which is why you've got to have mandate relief. You've got to cap these mandatory arbitration awards at a reasonable level, 2%. You've got to have real pension reform that people aren't allowed to get $150,000 pensions where they crank up the overtime at the end, where they have these defined benefit pensions where you get a guaranteed pension at a 7.5% return. Those days have to be over. But the state, unfortunately, is ignoring this problem and not dealing with it. There's other things you can do, too, and that's raising revenue. And I commend the administration for pushing for more state aid on bus aid and for sewers. With the buses, we are shortchanged here in Suffolk County. There's no doubt about it. Nassau gets far more money than we do. We are 3 times the geographic size of Nassau. We should be getting more money for our buses. And secondly, Nassau County, as the result of Sandy, and I said this a month ago on this show, they're getting $600 million to $1 billion in relief so that they can build their outflow pipe to prevent effluent from going into the bay, and it should go instead into the ocean. We in Suffolk are getting nothing for that. We're going to get slammed with hundreds of millions of dollars. We need more sewers. Nassau is 100% sewered. We are 30% sewered. We are the guys who need the money for sewers. We should be getting that money. The administration is pushing for it. And, it takes a long time. We started the process several years ago. They're carrying it on. Hopefully, we'll see some type of relief from the state and federal government in that regard. All right. We're going to be talking in the next session when we open up the phones about a bunch of things, and we're going to want to get your comment on it. We're going to be talking about an article this week that talked about Long Island having the most segregated schools in the nation. Not the state, the nation. You think about segregation, you think about Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi. Long Island, the most segregated schools in the nation. It's a disgrace because when you have that kind of segregation, the kids who are relegated to these poor schools are more likely than not going to get less opportunity for jobs, less opportunity for many, many other things. It's been my belief that this all stems from the segregation in our housing processes here in Long Island. We're the third most segregated housing in the entire nation. That is a stain on Long Island. It should be changed. We're going to talk about what efforts have been done in the past and what can be done in the future to change that. But we're going to want to hear from you about that. We're going to talk about this Kobe Bryant statement, which is really had the Twitter universe going off the deep end, where he said, hey, as an African American, I don't think I should be pigeonholed to say that this is how I feel about Trayvon Martin or George Zimmerman. I'm an individual. I can think on my own. Is he right? I think it was quite profound and brave for him to say that. He's getting a lot of pushback. I want to talk about Chris Christie. Is he off the hook? Is the media treating him differently? They're treating President Obama with the IRS scandal. I want to talk about the state budget with Larry Levy and so much more. So, folks, please call in. The phones open up in the next half hour, and it's going to be 541-1039 that will be welcoming your remarks. This is your radio station. We'll be joined by Larry Levy, Michael Watt, and Richard Young. You're going to love it. Stay tuned. Yeah, hi. I just got called regarding the reservations for tonight. I put in for 5 tickets, but I'm only going to have 3 people coming, and the name is Levy. Sure, sure. The one in Bohemia, 7 o'clock show. Levy, Levy. Yes, 3 people. Right. All right, thanks. Bye bye. Sort of talk about segregation. Yeah. So,
If you're looking for political correctness, you've come to the wrong place. It's Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, 1039 LI News Radio.
welcome back, folks. Steve Levy here on Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. I'm Steve Levy, the former county executive here in Suffolk County. This is part 2 of 4 segments here on this weekend afternoon. We want you to call in. The phones are open now, 451-1039. We'll be joined shortly by Michael Watt from the Long Island Gasoline Retailers. We're going to be talking about a new bill that has to do with what has to be posted to distinguish a credit card from cash purchases. I want to talk a little later about these proposals to bury utility lines and some segments of our population wanting the rest of the ratepayers in the PSEG LIPA grid to foot the bill for it. We want to know your thoughts on that as well. I started to talk about the article calling Long Island the most segregated area in the nation regarding schooling, and how shocking it is to some. It's not shocking to me because we saw early on that we are one of the most segregated from a housing perspective, and that's always been an affront to me. I just think that is just absolutely awful. You know, a person, if they have the economic means, should be able to live wherever they want, and there's no question about it that there is redlining. Realtors will deny it, but they will take an African American or Hispanic or people of color to certain areas as opposed to other areas. There's still a great deal of racism and prejudice as far as that goes. And I'm not a politically correct guy. I can't stand it when people yell racism and prejudice when it's not warranted. But it is warranted here. I mean, there are people who can afford to live in certain nice neighborhoods, and they just can't get in there. And it's not just always a matter of income. And it's not right for places progressive and as enlightened as we should be here on Long Island. And when I became county executive, I thought I would bring it to the forefront. And actually, in my inaugural speech, I talked about it more than anyone else ever did. We said we have to attack this. And, a person, whether your name is Diaz or Chang or Mohammed, whatever it is, you should be able to live where you can afford to live. And long story short, I started working with a group called Erase Racism. and Nassau County, and together we put together, we cobbled together a bill that allowed our local human rights division to have more powers, to be more aggressive on these type of discrimination complaints. And lo and behold, one day I'm at an NAACP meeting. It was a breakfast for Martin Luther King. Actually, it wasn't NAACP, excuse me. It was one of the local church groups that sponsored. They get like 800 people at in Hauppauge. And I've been there for 8 years in a row, paying my respects to that pastor. He was just an amazing guy, Reverend Coverdale from Riverhead. And I made my speech, and I said, hey, we really have to do something about it. We can't just talk about it. We have to unravel this and give powers to our Human Rights Commission. And I said, the same speech I had done maybe 40 times before, a person named Mohammed or Chang or Diaz should be able to live wherever they want. But in this case, I used an African-American ethnic name to deal with my audience there. Before an African-American audience, said Diaz, Chang, Mohammed, or Shaniqua should be able to live wherever they want if they can afford it. And oh my God, the next day, a Newsday reporter, who was sometimes columnist, sometimes has been favorable to me on fiscal stuff, but sees everything through these race-colored glasses, says that I insulted the African-American community. And why is that? Because she said I used the name Shaniqua. So, well, obviously I was using an ethnic name. Juan is an ethnic name. Chang is an ethnic name. I get, if I say Jones, is that black or white name? You say Shaniqua, it's more of an African-American type of name. But she said that was insulting to the African-American community. I said, well, why is that? Well, it's that name. It's a ghetto name. She said that, not me. I said, what, are you kidding me? There's a lot of people out there named Shaniqua. You're going to tell them that? And you're saying I insulted the African-American community because I said something like that? Well, yeah, well, what name should I have used? He says, well, you could have said Kwame. Now, I'm not making this up. So this reporter says that if I said a person named Kwame should live wherever he wants, as opposed to a person named Shaniqua could live wherever she wants, that's okay. If I say Shaniqua, it's not okay. It's kind of a racist overtone thing. Absolutely mind-boggling. And instead of us talking about the need to break this stranglehold on segregation in housing, I was the first county executive to talk about it like this, that we have to do something about it. The media twist it to be an anti-racial thing. Can't make this stuff up, folks. It's stuff like that is going to be in my book, Bias in the Media, that will be out very, very shortly through ebooks. But in the meantime, we have two people calling. There's a Mike from Smithtown. We're not going to take him right now. We're going to ask him to hold on because we got Mike from the Long Island retailers who's calling in to tell us about this proposal in Suffolk County regarding gas stations. Mike, are you with us? Mike what? Mike what? Are you with us?
I'm here.
Hey, Mike. Great to have you back. We were very fortunate to have you on our show a few months ago, and you gave great commentary. But I read your comments in the paper the other day when a legislator put in a bill in Suffolk that is really a heavy-duty regulation on gas station owners, claiming what? That they have to now reprogram all of their credit card apparatus so that people will know again that credit cards you charge more with your credit card. Isn't that already the law that you can see it in big block numbers at the gas station?
Well, it's the law that the prices be prominently displayed on top of the gas pump, the big six-inch letters. So if you're paying attention, you can't miss it. And what happened in this case, there's one particular owner of several stations, all very visible, most of them right along the LIE, who has a practice every now and then of goosing up the charges for the charge per gallon for people who use credit cards to almost $1 extra for the credit card usage.
But he still has to post that with the block numbers on the pump, right? Okay.
Correct. So if I'm savvier than your average consumer. I actually pulled into one of his stations, and I had a brand card which is the same as cash. And I'm on fumes. I'm putting a couple of gallons in. And all of a sudden, I realized he was begging me for the extra $1 on the brand card. So I stopped pumping, put the gas cap back on, and went somewhere else. So it's not against the law to charge extra for credit cards. Most of the stations do it because the banks charge such egregious fees for the use of bank cards in the gasoline purchase process. I'm talking about 9 to 10 cents a gallon, Steve, per gallon. They get to charge the station owners for consumers who use the credit cards.
But I know that, and I see that every time I go into a gas station, it's prominently posted that I know this is what I pay credit, this is what I pay cash. This just seems to me to be, killing an ant with a sledgehammer. What is the impact that this regulation is going to have on the owner who have a very, these are not oil companies. These are small owners. These are retailers. What is the bill requiring them to do?
Well, that's an excellent point, Steve. And it's not just this. It seems like every week that goes by, something else comes up where, we're going to ask them to do that, or we're going to ask them to do this. So 2 weeks ago, the Suffolk County raised the age of that consumers could buy tobacco products. So, regardless of how you feel about that, that's a hit to the revenue stream. And now a week later, they're going to force the mom and pop businesses to make an adjustment because somebody wasn't paying attention when he pumped his gas.
Well, what does it actually require? What would it require the station owner to do?
Well, we have to reprogram the gas pumps and the computer systems to show that when you're using a credit card, they want to hit you over the head with electronic notification that there's a difference. It's kind of like the ATM fee when you go to an ATM.
Okay, but so in other words, it's not enough to have these huge block letters right on the pump itself, as is required by state law. These legislators want it to be further that now you have to buy this apparatus as an owner to say when you do the credit card application, you're now knowing what the difference is. By the way, it's too late by then because you've already filled up anyway, which is not something that's been noted. But it's just another example of how crazy this overregulation can be. I know another example. I just read it about a month ago in Suffolk County. They want to start rating pet stores. They want an independent panel to come around and go to all the pet stores and say, you get an A, you get a B, you get a C. I mean, it's so subjective. It can destroy a person's business. There should be regulation by a public entity. But I don't know. It just seems that there's no concern for the average business owner here.
Well, you just touched on something there, Steve. The biggest concern is all these little rules and regulations are all well and good, well-intentioned, but what they're doing is they're driving the mom and pop out, and within 10 years, all you're going to see is corporate chains in a lot of places. They're going to go the same way as the hardware store and the local pharmacist, because one guy or a guy who owns one station, to get hit with a fine is a much bigger hit than a guy who owns a dozen, or a Quick Check, or a Bola. One of my, I work with the gasoline retail, and one of the guys got a $500 fine because his fire extinguisher was painted the wrong shade of red. And that's $500. That's somebody's salary for the week.
But I don't know. We're just in a culture. We're in this culture from the top on, from the federal government, where they say you didn't build that business. The government did, or somebody else. It's sad. There really has to be a greater recognition for how thin the profit margin is for these businesses. And Mike, I want to thank you for explaining that to us and giving us your thoughts. And we'd love to have you back on the show real soon.
Anytime, Steve. Thanks for the time. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. That was Mike Watt from the retailers, the gasoline retailers. And Mike from Smithtown has been holding like a trooper. Well, we thank you, Mike. You're on the air now if you're still with us, Mike. Mike from Smithtown, are you with us? Maybe he gave up. Here he is.
Yeah.
Mike, you got to shut off your radio in the background. There's a little too much reverberation there. Can you?
It's not on.
Okay, I think you're on a speaker or something.
Okay.
Here we go. There you go,
I'm
Mike.
now.
Okay, Mike. Thanks for joining us, my friend. Tell us what's on your mind. What's on your mind?
Yes, you have a knack for talk radio, Steve. I'm glad you're doing this. I love talk radio, and I love talk radio even better on a local basis.
Well, I'll tell you, thank you for that. And I have to commend the station because, John Caracciolo, who's the head of this radio station, said there's a niche here. There's a gap. People can listen to Limbaugh. They can listen to Hannity, and they're very entertaining. Or they can listen to a liberal there's not many of them out there. But there's not, there's nothing talking about this, at the gas pump, or trying to bury the utility poles here, or Suffolk County finances, or the police department. We do that, and we're very proud of it, and it's going to grow and grow and grow. So thanks, Mike. And so what were your thoughts on things?
Well, my thoughts, and I'm getting reverberation back on my end, too. I could hear my voice as I'm speaking. But the problem I see as a financial advisor now going on 32 years is that many of my clients are complaining about the cost of living here on Long Island, Suffolk County, and I see many of their children wanting to move off Long Island. So from a macroeconomic point of view, what is being done in New York State to incentivize people to stay here on the island?
Well, I'll tell you, it's a great question. I just saw a poll and thanks so much, Mike, for the call. I just saw a poll, and it appeared on News 12, that over 30% of young people 18 to 34 think it is likely that they will be moving off Long Island in the next 5 years. That is scary. And when asked what the major reasons were, there were pretty much two. One was lack of affordability, both housing and taxes. And the other was lack of excitement. And those are two things that we've been trying to tackle. Now, one of the problems that we have here is this started off here on Long Island as a bedroom community. It was the city that was the economic engine in the 60s and 70s when we were starting to boom and we were growing. People were moving out first to Nassau. They still had their job in the city. The dad was the breadwinner. Mom stayed home. There was one car in the family. They had 5 kids. Dad went to work in the city, came home, went to bed, did it all over again. And that worked when, people were getting married at 23 years old and having 4 kids by the time they were 30. And that was the American way. Well, demographics have changed. People are getting married much later. Sometimes they wait until their 30s. They're having 1 or 2 kids instead of 5 kids. And these young people in their late 20s are saying, hey, in my mother's generation, I would have been married and had kids and wanted that 4-bedroom house with a quarter of an acre. I'm a single guy. I don't need that. I don't want that. I want some excitement. I want to hang out with other young people. I want to be able to get a beer. I want to be able to hang out and have some nightlife. We don't have that too much here on Long Island. And so we have to get back to thinking what will keep people here. So we've been trying to develop these new type of developments where it's mixed use, where you have more rental options for young people that are affordable. They don't need their car as much. They can go out and have a drink, congregate with other young people, a sense of community that hasn't always happened. Long Island has about the lowest proportion of rentals that you will find anywhere in the nation. In fact, it's the lowest. In Suffolk County, it's about 17% of our housing stock. That's why it's one of the reasons it's so expensive. Add on to that the high cost of taxes and everything else, and that is passed along to a renter. So it's this lack of affordability. And then when you want to finally buy a house, it's so darn expensive, because even if you can find a house now that is cheaper, that it's no longer $400,000, but you can get it in the high 2s or the low 3s for a starter house, the taxes might be $10,000. Where you go to Florida, it's an $80,000 house, $100,000 house, and you're paying $2,000 in taxes. So there's something wrong with this picture. And that's why when people say, oh, it's just 2% or 3% increase in the taxes have to start going the other way, 2 or 3% down, not 2 or 3% up. It's confiscatory. Young people can't do it. Here's a trick that I think we should come up with here on Long Island. When you're in Florida and you go to a closing, you pay your taxes at the end of the year, not in the beginning. What does that mean? If you are buying a house here on Long Island, you have to come up with a tremendous amount of money for that down payment. If you don't have to come up with 8 months of taxes for escrow, that can make the difference for you by, staying or leaving. I really think it's time for the state legislature to consider having these new people who are buying homes for the first time to pay their taxes at the end of the year, as they do in Florida, as opposed in the beginning of the year. Now, I mentioned just a moment ago that we have this low rental stock. And I think that's one of the reasons, going back to my commentary a little earlier with segregation here in our schools. That's one of the reasons you have segregation in housing, because there's not enough good quality rental available for folks. And, the people get stuck in basement apartments, attic apartments. We really do need more rental. We really do need to change a system so that people of any color can live where they want to live if they have the means to do so. I was talking about the media bias and how this Newsday reporter totally twisted what I was trying to say in support of this desegregation. And instead, I got criticized because I used the name Shaniqua in my speech. But you want to talk about another sense of media bias. Look at what's happening right now with the Chris Christie matter, okay? Christie releases a report yesterday that was done by a guy he hired. So is it biased? It probably is, okay? When you hire the guy, the outcome is probably going to be more favorable to you. So I don't have a problem with the media criticizing the fact that there was this bias inherent in the report, which seems to exonerate Christie, okay? And by the way, I think he probably didn't know about it, because at this point, if he did, we would have seen something to that effect. But notwithstanding that, it was a very serious thing what happened here. When you talk about closing off a bridge, people can die from that, okay? So it's very, very serious. But the media dismisses this report because it was, a guy who was close to Christie and he furnished a report. But where are the op-eds? Where are the editorials? Where's the outrage from the liberal media when President Obama calls for an investigation of the IRS scandal by doing what? He appoints a person within his own Justice Department to investigate it, a person who was a donor to the president. $6,000 in donations to the president. Now, you're going to tell me that Barbara Bosserman, who is a U.S. attorney who gave $6,000 to the president, is not going to be biased with her outcome? All I'm saying is be fair here. You want to criticize the Christie administration for what they did, fair enough. That was a terrible thing to do. I don't know if Christie was involved with it. This study seems to say he was not. You can claim that there was a bias there, but be even-handed. And when there's a bias with a Democrat, you got to say that as well. I'll tell you, it just can boil your blood sometimes. Now, here's another example. They're all over the map now because Republicans are going to see this guy, Sheldon Aronson, who is a very big donor to Republicans. Billionaire, gives big money around, and they all talk about how this is polluting the system. That's fine. Criticize it. But do you see that same kind of outrage when it comes to George Soros, the big liberal, who is giving billions of dollars away to fund various races? Or these big environmental billionaires who look for candidates who they consider quote-unquote pro-environment? Or Mike Bloomberg. When the Koch brothers put up money for a particular cause, that's dirty money. When Mike Bloomberg, the billionaire mayor, says he's going to put up a few $100 million to promote pro-gun control candidates in various states, well, that's okay, because that's a good cause to the liberal media. That's the problem. It's not so much the criticism, folks. It's the double standard that we see consistently. All right, we're going to go into the last hour in a few moments after this commercial break. We're going to have Rich Young from Young & Young Law Firm joining us. He's got a great perspective on all types of issues. Larry Levy, formerly of the Newsday editorial board, is going to be calling in about the state budget and what it means to you. And we're going to talk about Kobe Bryant's comments about Trayvon Martin. We're going to talk about burying utility poles underground and whether you should pay for that for other people who don't want their neighborhoods messed up. Join us, 451-1039 on the next hour. You must have cooked. Yeah, I don't know which side you got him here. So you did show earlier? I do 2 hours, yeah. Yeah, I missed your show right before me now. I used to have it. I used to listen to it live coming in. But you guys still doing like a half an hour, an hour or so? Yeah, 2 hours long time. I mean, political issue, I can talk about anything. You know, when you've got, you know, just law stuff, you can go so far. But, fun stuff here. Let me get some categories. Okay, we got these East End snobs want to bury the utility lines, and they want PSEG and LIPA to pay for it, which means we pay for it. So it's one thing we might be able to talk about. I just talked about the Chris Christie thing. We talked about that a little more. Talk about college, the unionizing of the college kids. But first thing, we're going to have Larry Levy call in. He's a former Newsday editorial board guy, and he's going to give us the breakdown on what's happening on the state level with the budget. There's state aid, there's the pre-K handicap stuff, which I've been a critic of because it doesn't really work. Whether this tax cut plan is actually going to happen. The DREAM Act, which is for the illegal aliens, which I don't think got included in there. Charter schools, campaign reform, those are things he'll talk about and we'll chime in. Then cop stuff. I want.
What did they do? What did they call that? Head Start program.
Head Start is similar to pre-K.
But it's a waste of money.
That's exactly right.
Every statistic shows it's just a waste of money.
That's it. But here they come out and they say, we're gonna do more and more. Did you hear Kobe Bryant's comments? Kobe Bryant was in an interview with New York Magazine saying, you know, the Miami Heat all wore hoods in support of Trayvon Martin. And he did an article. Hey, we shouldn't be doing that. Look at the facts. I'm a black man. You shouldn't assume that because I'm a black man, I'm going to take the side of African American cause. You know, I'm an individual. And it was really good stuff. You know, but he's getting his ass kicked by a lot of these nutcases. So we might go into that. Yeah. With the cop stuff, you know, I was just talking about how the Suffolk budget is really hurting, and part of the reason it's so damn expensive. Now, you were a city cop, right? And we'll talk about your pension was this pension. What was your top, you know, you don't say your top salary. What's the top salary over there? What the heck? You know, did you follow this thing with this the guy who was shaking down the Hispanics in Suffolk County? Talk about that a little bit. And my point is, he's a bad apple, but you shouldn't paint the whole department that way. Now, we might disagree, which is good on this, because I'm going to say I'm against their salaries and everything, but I tend to give cops benefit of the doubt when there's a conversation. You may come from a lawyer and say, hey, don't do that. You know, that's okay, you know, so we can talk about that. And Hispanic thing. Yeah, anything else. There's so many freaking things. Once he's gone, we'll have a whole second segment, the second hour, we can ramble about a whole bunch of things. Did the overregulation. Well, there was a proposal on the gasoline stations that, you know, when you go and you see credit and cash, well, this guy wants to go further and now require that the gas station put it on the credit electronic entertainer. Just keeps it lively. Makes them feel like they're part of it. So what else we got here? I was just talking about the Chris Christie stuff and just the double standards.
Oh, the Republicans?
Yeah. How, well, he had his own guy, his own. He hired the guy who did the study. Okay, fair criticism. Why don't they say that about Obama? When he puts in charge of the IRS review a person within the Justice Department who gave him $6,000. You don't hear about that. It's just.
What are they up to?
Going on strike. They might. Could talk about Obama meeting with the Pope was interesting.
Yeah, two different versions came out of that meeting.
Yeah, exactly. But the whole thing, with Limbaugh calling the Pope a socialist, and I think that was overboard. He's just saying help the poor. He wasn't trashing free enterprise, But Obama eats that up to justify him with the entitlement crap,
Yeah.
The same payments or pay even less.
If you're looking for political correctness, you've come to the wrong place. It's Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, 1039 LI News Radio.
Hey folks, Steve Levy here. Welcome to Steve Levy, the Steve Levy Show, Speak Out Long Island. Former County Executive Steve Levy here. We have another hour to go, and it's a live call-in show, so we want to hear from you, 451-1039. We have some callers on hold. Stay with us. I'm going to put you on the air as soon as I introduce our guest for this hour. It's Rich Young, who you probably know about, folks, if you're listeners here at LI News Radio. Rich Young is half of the Young and Young radio show that we have, and I said in my earlier segment, I'm an attorney by training, I should say. And I learn a lot listening to these guys as an attorney, and you can as well. So, and Rich hears my show because I used to follow him, and he said, I want to do your show. I want to talk politics. So welcome. Here's going to be your chance, Rich.
Thank you, Steve. I enjoy being here.
Great. And Rich was a former police officer as well in New York City. He's got a lot to say about police interaction, salaries, the whole bit. But we always like to get our callers involved. And we're going to start off this segment with Anthony from Shirley, who wants to chime in. And, folks, you're all welcome to call in as well at 451-1039, and then we'll get back to it with Rich Young. So, Anthony, thanks for waiting, and thanks for joining our show.
Mike, how are you?
Very well, thanks. What's on your mind, Anthony?
I have a couple subjects that you were on I'd like to talk about.
Sure.
All right. One, you were mentioning Obama with Russia.
Yes.
I think Obama's going about it in the wrong direction. He should have approached these outlying countries to get into NATO. And getting into NATO would have automatically protected them.
I'll tell you, Anthony, there are people who think that goes both ways, and I agree with you. I would have liked them to bring them into NATO a long time ago, because what that does is it sends a message to the Russians that they're part of us. It's all for one and one for all. The downside of that is that you're now saying it's all for one and one for all and all for one, meaning that once he attacks a NATO country, you are obligated by treaty to go in there. But I'm with you thinking that when they're in the treaty and you have the knowledge by Putin that if I go in there, there's going to be a response, he wouldn't go in there in the first place. Is that what your thought is?
Exactly, but what's happening is that, see, nobody's listening to Obama because he lacks the respect. And the respect comes by the amount of authority that you have with other countries. So he doesn't have that because he doesn't really
He also doesn't have it because he drew a red line in the sand and swore that we were going to take care of Syria, and then he backed away. You know, you can't go to the whole world and say I'm drawing a red line and then walk away.
All right, I'm going to play devil's advocate and defend him on that one because here's what people forget too. Obama foolishly drew that red line. I think he regretted it later. But then he said, we've got to do something about this. We've got to have force. And then he asked Congress for the authority for force because he really wanted the resolution to go down. But, you know, it was Congress who said, we don't want the force. So, you know, I don't think he's Jimmy Carter, but he really isn't showing leadership at all. And when you say we're not going to use military force, you're telling Putin, go in.
Absolutely. But by drawing that red line, whether it was foolish or not, he did it.
Yeah.
It all happened because he didn't speak to anybody that could really change his direction of what he wants.
You know, people don't realize what a master George Bush the 41st was. The way he orchestrated that first Gulf War, masterful. Got everybody on board, went through the process, gave the warning, they ignored the warning, and then did it with the international community behind them. And there could be some lessons there. But, you know, you have to at least lead. He made the calls. He pushed. Now, Obama's saying they don't want to work with us. Well, you've got to push the envelope. You've got to say, hey, we'll be there with the natural gas if they cut you off. He's not doing it. So I think you're right on that, Andy.
Right. See, the other problem is the Keystone, okay? The pipeline.
Yes.
It is a problem on our side also because you got a lot of people who don't want the Keystone pipeline.
Yeah, but again, if we wanted to build a cross-national highway today, you wouldn't be able to do it because there'd be an environmentalist saying there's a tiger salamander here or some toad over there that the habitat might get disturbed. You'd never have a railroad. You'd never have a highway. You'd never have an airport. They'd block everything. You don't think it's a good idea to have the Keystone Pipeline?
No, I do believe that it's the best thing that we can have. The problem is they're not approaching the people where they're thinking that these companies are going to be making billions of dollars and they're getting just pennies for their land.
I think he's just placating the far left environmentalists. What do you think, Rich?
Absolutely. And I think that if we don't take that Keystone Pipeline, we're not going to get that oil from Canada and it's going to go to China. And we can't afford to give any more energy away.
Well, listen, thanks for your thoughts on this, Anthony.
There's one other topic I want to talk to you about.
Please. Then I got Larry Levy, our guest, on hold. But go ahead, make it fast.
All right, no problem. All right, it's the segregation of the schools and everything else. Mainly, most of that comes down to respect also. I know when my grandparents came into this country, they were also, browbeated and everything else, more respected. But they gained respect by doing the right thing. Now, the problem is affordability is only because this state is not reducing the cost. Like you got LIFA that still has a 17.5% interest-only loan that we're still paying for. That should have been brought down years ago. Also, you got the schools should reduce their costs by at least 40-50%, and that would make everything affordable for everybody. By doing the right thing. They have a lot of programs that just are not working, and they're paying people like CEOs like $600,000-$700,000. There's craziness to that kind of position.
Well, we want to
definitely reduce their administration.
Well, thanks so much for your thoughts, Anthony. You are absolutely right about the cost of schools. We have to see if we can mold that conversation into how it deals with segregation at a later point in the show. But we have on the line who's been waiting so patiently. We thank you, Larry Levy. Larry is the former Newsday editorial board member. Presently is the director of suburban studies at Hofstra University. Did I get it right, Larry?
Nah.
It's close enough, though, right? What's the official title, Larry?
Well, Newsday, I was a senior editorial writer and chief political columnist, but at Hofstra, I'm the dean of the National Center for Suburban Studies. But close enough for government work. You were in government a very long time, so you're never going to lose those habits, my friend.
Well, good enough for me. But the main thing I'm going to tout you as right now is a connoisseur of local and state politics. And you have your nose to the grindstone when it comes to what's happening on the state level with the state budget. And most importantly, how it's going to affect our listeners here on Long Island. And by the way, you're joined by Rich Young, who's a fantastic attorney from the law firm Young & Young. He's joining us for the whole hour. But we wanted to make sure that you can fill us in. A lot of stuff is happening up there, Larry. And, it's ugly as they make the sausage, and we don't know what the final product is going to be. But I'd say about 95% of it is complete, wouldn't you say, with a few other things that still have to be put together?
No, I'd say about 99.8% is complete. It's done.
All right, so
whatever's not done will be taken up during the legislation portion of the session. The budget's done. I mean, the budget was 95% done a month ago.
Well, I think that's the easy part, it seems. The numbers were pretty easy. It looks like they're going to have $1 billion more in state aid, which is pretty remarkable. I mean, here we are supposedly in this time of constraint, and it's a 5% increase in aid to education.
Steve, why do you say this is a time of constraint? We got the stock market at an all-time high. We got housing prices starting to shoot up again. We have unemployment is dropping. I'm being half facetious because it probably should be a time of a little more constraint. Oh. You know what happens when we come out of a recession in government. There have been some tightness. Politicians have had to say no to people, and then all of a sudden they've got some money and they want to spend it. My concern isn't spending the money that they really have. My concern, which has been your concern over the years, even we may differ on some priorities and some nuances, is spending money you don't have. And that's the fine print of this budget that you won't know for a while.
Well, that's a good point, because one of the highlights of the budget from the governor was this tax cut, which was premised on a surplus that doesn't exist yet. It was remarkable. In all my years, Larry, I never remember a budget that was presented where they said, we're not going to mention that in the present year we're facing a deficit, which has been acknowledged by the controller, Tom DiNapoli. They have a deficit this year. But he's saying, we project over the next 2 years a surplus coming in, and because we project that on speculation, we're going to budget a tax cut to come down the road in the next 2 years. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, you think I'm being a little too paranoid on that?
You probably have, and have either forgotten it, or as a bad memory, or I probably could remind you that this is an election year. This is a year when not only are all the senators and assembly members up, but so is the governor.
Right.
And they are going to want to put what they believe is their best foot forward. They want to deliver pork. They want to deliver good stuff. I'm not saying that even a fraction of all the stuff in the budget is bad for people, right, and wrong to be done. Even as someone who loves to spend government money on what I would consider to be important issues that grow the economy and help families, I always believed you had to have the money to pay for it, and if you didn't have the money to pay for it, you had to be honest about raising taxes to do it. And if you didn't have the guts to raise the taxes, then don't take credit for the program.
Okay, that's a great point, and that segues.
But this is the year when and I think this is where you want to go, this is the year when they're spending money that maybe they will have, maybe they won't have.
And that segues.
Don't know it.
That segues into pre-K. And when you were here last time, thank you for being here. You were an awesome guest. You generated a lot of calls. We had a little back and forth about pre-K. Let's not get into whether it's good or bad or whether. But is there the money?
Let's assume, for argument's sake, though, that it's an okay thing.
Okay, let's do that. Now, here's the rub. You had de Blasio saying, I want this program, and I want to pay for it by raising taxes on the rich. At least he was honest enough to say, this is how much it's going to cost, and I need the money. So Cuomo comes in, and Trump said, I don't want this liberal from New York trumping me to make it appear that he's making me do pre-K. I want to be the guy with pre-K. I don't want to be outflanked from the left. So, no, you're not going to do it. We're going to do it on the state level for everybody. But then winds up giving $300 million to the city and $40 million for the rest of the state when his his own education department head says it's going to cost $1.5 billion a year to fund it.
Well, you're not delivering what his own education people said quite right.
I'll get you to quote.
It's going to be $1 billion and change over a fairly long period that it takes for the districts to ramp up. if the Blasio in New York City are ready to go, they have all these programs in place, they can probably spend this money. The rest of the state doesn't have these programs in place and can't spend it. But you know what the game is that they play up there, and I'm not even being all that cynical about it. New York City and the Assembly Democrats primarily, and some members of the Senate ruling coalition from New York have said, this is our priority, this is what we want our money to go to, this is where we're going to take our share of the big increase in spending.
Now,
Long Island and upstate had different priorities that they put on the table, and pre-K wasn't one of them. So you can't make the comparison because the other places didn't want any more. They wanted straight school aid increases. They wanted to end that gap closing business that they put in a couple of years ago that hurt Long Island.
But you can't say Long Island schools are not going to want it when there was a promise from the governor that we're going to pay for it for everyone, and then they say, where's mine? It's not there. But Rich we were talking before the segment started, and he's got a problem with the whole concept.
My problem with the concept is that
Larry, let me see.
they've done Head Start, and there have been all kinds of studies now on Head Start, and it doesn't work. The best...
You're so... I don't know where you get this. Steve and I talked about this. Head Start works beautifully. What happens is that when the kids get out of Head Start, get several years into it, they go back to school systems that are horrible. It's not Head Start. You're totally missing the point on that.
He is not.
I can't argue it. I can't argue with you on it.
All right, go check out a story.
Your own facts,
but not your opinion.
Your own opinion, but not your own facts. Here.
But Larry, check out the article from Russ Whitehurst from Brown University, who says exactly the opposite of you. And I'll just read one little line from what this guy says. Unfortunately, supporters of preschool for all, including some academics who are way out in front of what evidence says and know it, it's turned out they've turned a blind eye to the mixed and conflicting nature of the research. And he goes on in this study, and this was a Brown economist who noted that in Tennessee, it made absolutely no difference. In Oklahoma and other places, you can find one or two studies that say it's okay here and there. Many of them say it's not, and many of them are kind of mixed. So I think at least Rich is right to say that it's up in the air. You can't say that this is definitive, and they're looking to spend all this money.
Every state does it differently. Obviously, the assumption is you're going to do it right. You're going to do it academically. It's not going to be babysitting, and that there's going to be follow-up. I mean, if you want to be cynical about every single program and say that because Oklahoma didn't do it right, where they spend nothing on teachers,
Oklahoma and Tennessee and Georgia. So the prototype that Obama wants to use is based on these programs that haven't worked. That's the prototype he wants to use.
Obama has nothing to do with this pre-K thing.
He certainly did. Obama was the guy who first preached it 2 years ago in the state. The state did it again this year. Now, of course, New York can craft it differently, and de Blasio wants to do his, and Cuomo wants to do his. But it's all the same concept of pre-K.
Well, all right. I'm not going to argue whether it. I mean, if you want to argue, I'm telling you, it's very important to do that. Most of the research, the Brown guy notwithstanding, I'm very impressed. An Ivy League guy may take this position. You can cherry pick studies.
Oh, there's many others.
I'm telling you.
Okay.
That okay. All right.
You're entitled. We'll agree to disagree.
I don't want to argue. I think it's wasting time.
Let me. What's going on up there with the DREAM Act? There was a big push, and the DREAM Act being that young people who are undocumented would be able to get state subsidized tuition as any other resident. And I know it was dead, but then they started to resurrect it, whereby they would give tax credits to those who wanted to donate money for this cause. I think even that's dead, but have you heard anything different?
I haven't heard anything. It could get resurrected in the legislative section of it, but they couldn't fund it for, a whole other year would have to go by.
By the way, to me, I'm glad they did kill it.
It'll come back and it'll eventually pass.
That's why you have, and whether you like it or not, it makes a difference if you have a Republican Senate or not. A Democratic Senate would have passed it. a Republican Senate, even with this coalition with the independents, stopped it. So it does matter. You might not like the outcome, but people have to understand these Senate votes this year are crucial because the whole balance of the state hinges on who wins the Senate. Rich, did you have any thoughts on it?
No, without a doubt. If the Senate goes completely Democratic, then the city of New York is going to get everything, and everybody else is going to be left out, completely out.
Larry, charters. That was a big deal as well, where we had the de Blasio-Cuomo rift. De Blasio coming out again, far left, saying he wants to mitigate the growth of charters in the city. And Cuomo actually championing out of the city buildings.
Why you say that's far left? Because, charter schools have been supported by a huge portion of the Democrats' left base. It's the black and Latino community of New York City.
Yes, that is true.
So
and Hasidics as well.
My problem here overall is you're trying to put everything in a box.
I'm talking about the union. Let's say the union left. You are correct.
A lot of charter schools have unions too. You're trying to oversimplify.
Nah, but let's be real here, Larry.
You're trying to oversimplify.
Let's be real. Who are the biggest opponents to charter school? It's the teachers' unions. You are correct that the supporters of charter schools are split across the demographics. You're right there. But where are we going with this? I think Cuomo's pretty much won out on this, where they've put in some measures that will actually allow for expansion.
Yeah, but understand something. I mean, de Blasio's errors here were political in getting his own message out. Take Eva Moskowitz, who's done a great job in, I'm an agnostic on charter schools. I think let 1,000 flowers bloom. Let's try every possible way to give kids opportunity. I don't really care one way or another, as long as they work. But, Eva Moskowitz got most of her charters continued. She got space in public schools. She got rejected on 3 locations. And it went nuclear partly because de Blasio blew it, and partly because she sensed that there was a threat here, and she went to the mattresses as well. But charter schools are not in any danger. They wouldn't have been in any danger by anything the legislature or the governor or de Blasio was trying to do. They are a fact of life. In some places they are successful. Some places they are not successful. They get public school money.
I think you're right there.
The only thing they're not getting, unless this has changed, and I missed it, they're not getting building aid like districts get.
And, hey, Larry, I got a minute left. Any other tidbits from the state that we should know about, or we should chime in?
One quick thing. Before people celebrate a so-called 5% increase in school aid, and then get very disappointed when they see their districts on Long Island get, 3.5%. The 5% overall includes the pre-K money, and
which we're not getting a lot of.
It's going to be dispersed the way it generally is. So, I mean, the average increase on Long Island won't be 5%.
Right, that's a good point.
But it's going to be way above inflation.
Yep.
And if they do it by formula and not by politics, a disproportionate share will go to the poorer school districts that have a harder ability to raise money.
Yep.
But again, this is one of those areas, being in the legislature, you really have to look carefully.
Well, listen,
the fine print is everything.
Larry, thanks so much for your insight. You really do have the nose to the grindstone. We'll have you on a future show as well. We appreciate your time. And Rich is going to hang around for the second half hour. It's going to be just me and Rich. We're going to be talking about all kinds of things, such as who should pay for burying utility poles. What about Kobe Bryant's comments about Trayvon Martin? And we're losing 2 big businesses, Entenmann's and Adecco. Does that have anything to do with the outrageous cost of living here on Long Island? I think so. We're going to want to hear from you. 451-1039. Call in our next segment.
There have been more than 100 aftershocks, which the experts say is a good thing. It relieves the pressure. ABC's Ryan Owen is in Lahaba.
What the seismologists will tell you is don't read too much into the fact that we had 2 quakes in 2 weeks. Their bigger concern is that this fault that is located in Orange County here was responsible for a huge quake in the 1980s, the Whittier quake. Some people might remember that. They don't want to see this fault reawaken because this fault runs right through downtown Los Angeles.
Tornado warnings up in central Florida. Several thunderstorm warnings also in effect. Crews paused in their search for victims of the catastrophic.
Yeah, you can read it right now. Even said, very, so right on. Let's go to backtrack a little.
Authorities say they've all but abandoned hope of finding any more survivors. 9 people are listed as missing. About 6 million Americans may be taken off medications for high blood pressure. Under controversial new guidelines issued in December, men whose blood pressure that had previously been considered high would now be considered to have normal blood pressure. Dr. Anne-Marie Malvadova of Duke University authored the study.
There are a number of those particularly overly resistant who have trouble with their medication. Either
Another flight just came down.
low blood pressure or falls moderately low blood pressure.
Yeah, fucking boring. My cousin's getting married tomorrow.
How's the weather supposed to be tomorrow?
Shitty. Poor people landing in this crap. But here's the study right here. I wish I could have read all of the other stuff. Here it is. The group that experienced the Tennessee Volunteer State Program performed somewhat less well cognitive tasks at the end of the first grade than the control group. He just makes shit up half the time, you know?
Who, him? This guy?
Yeah, Larry.
Yeah, Larry, yeah. Oh, that's what Newsday does.
Last week I got about 15 calls because I was talking about the DREAM Act, immigration and shit. And I thought I was going to get a lot today because of the rain. It's been kind of lukewarm. Yeah, I can't tell. It's Kobe. It's this. Hispanics.
That sounds nice.
Huh?
Flight going out to Orlando. I said, that sounds nice. It's been tough.
Shit. What's your thoughts
Yeah,
on?
I heard that a white shield cop will be around 200 grand with us all the time, with moderate overtime.
Yeah.
Not even a lot.
Like
I mean, we
you
have
high
guys.
up?
We have guys right now making 250,000 with overtime.
Oh yeah. And a lot of that's in the last year. Yeah, you get you get into the pension shit.
Well, these guys retire with $1 million checks.
In NASA, they get 500,000 for when you're sick on vacation. Now in the city, you don't get anything.
You don't get nothing.
That's all I'm talking about.
You get your 401k or whatever you put in it.
Well, they've got a defined benefit, right? You get
A pension.
Yeah.
Half pay after 20 years. But now they've just changed that to the young guys.
For the new
coming on.
guys coming in,
Yeah,
right.
really big. Really big.
I have a tough time getting liberals on here. It's hard to find them with those people who show up.
Really?
We're back. This County Executive Steve Levy. We welcome you back to Speak Out Long Island with former County Executive Steve Levy. This is our last segment of the show. It's live. It's a call-in. We want to hear from you at 451-1039. We've got Rich Young. Rich Young is from the law firm Young & Young. They have a show here, a great weekend show on legal matters. And if you want to learn something about the law, you listen to these guys. Very practical stuff that they talk about. Where are you guys located, Rich?
863 Islip Avenue, Central Islip. We're right around the corner from the courthouse.
And you, between you and your brother, you split many different areas of the law that you deal with, right?
Yes, yeah. We cover all kinds of legal things. I mean, predominantly, you know, the big thing in Long Island practice is your criminal law, your traffic, and your personal injury. But we do the other things. I have a lot of corporate clients that I represent. Unfortunately, some of them leaving the state.
Which I want to get into, about how expensive it is to stay here on the island. And you know, it's so great having you on this show, because not only are you an attorney with these clients who've been hurting so bad, but you're a retired police officer from New York City. Sergeant, okay.
Sergeant.
No difference in officer and a higher level. And, you know, you shake your head. You know, you hear me talking a lot about the contracts that we have here that are out of control.
Outrageous.
And you know, you're a guy who was an officer, went through the process, retired, and you can't even fathom what it is that the salaries are, the pensions here, all the other things that make it so unaffordable.
Well, what doesn't make sense to me first is New York City hires a class every 6 months, and they put 2,000 people in the academy, and they have no problem getting 2,000 qualified people. Top pay for a city cop without night diff is about $78,000. So, you know, under this new contract that Suffolk County's got, top pay is going to be $200,000. You know, for a police officer. And the real hurting part here, the thing that scares me, is we have more people in this county, you know, in the last 30 years. And I'm watching the police force tick down, not up. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I mean, we got a lot more people living here. Brookhaven, you know, grew up, and hundreds and thousands of new homes.
Well, one of the reasons it's so hard to put more cops on the streets, because now costing an average of $200,000 per officer.
That's just his pay. That's not his health care. That's not his pension, because you got to pay the state the pension money. I mean, it's probably costing you probably $300,000 to $400,000.
Well, I know when I was still exec, that did include the health care benefits and all. But now with this new contract, they're saying, you know, just the pay and the overtime alone, average overtime for a detective, you'll have a $227,000 officer by the end of this. And I'm always, you know, the pushback I get on this often is, well, isn't a police officer worth it? And I would always say, yes, a police officer is worth anything you give them. The question, though, is what can we afford? And you can't afford that. You can't put more guys out in the street when it costs you that much. And you wonder why the cost of living is so expensive. Your schools are 60% of your bill. So much of that is personnel and their contracts with the Triborough Amendment. But in the county, you look at your tax bill, $100 goes to the general fund.
Right.
$1,000 goes to just the police, and most of that is salary, benefits, and everything else.
I looked at my tax bill recently. It's a lot more than $1,000 going to the police fund. A lot more.
But now you're a guy from the city. You distinguish here in Suffolk and Nassau. When an officer leaves, they get termination pay, which is pay for unused sick and vacation. In the city, you use it or you lose it every year, correct?
Right. You use your vacation or you lose it, you know. So the bottom line is there is no big checks when you walk out of the city. You know, you'll have the 401 or whatever you contributed to, and the city matches some of it.
Which is fair, and it's unlimited sick, really. If you're really sick, they're not going to fire you. You can, you know, ramp up the days. You know, you're showing that you're sick. But you just don't get 26 sick days a year like they do here on Long Island, and you either use them and you're off, you know, probably 100 days a year that are paid between 6 weeks vacation and everything else, or you bank it. And what people don't realize is a lot of these guys are leaving after 20, 30 years, 30, 35 years, check of $300,000 a year.
Is not uncommon.
Right, and you see it, you know, in your law, and you wonder why we're going broke. I remember when I first came in, the starting salary for an officer here was $57,000. That was where city guys were capped. And you know, you really have...
Top pay at that time for a city cop was $55,000.
Right.
After 5 years. Top pay was 55, and they were starting them in the academy here at 57.
I always said that, the problem is that the pendulum swings too far one way to. You actually had the city guys who were underpaid, who were really under the gun, in dangerous places. They should have been getting more. And the guys out in Long Island, it was too much money going in. Somewhere there was a happy median there. And I always tried to tell people, Rich, it's not a matter of being anti-police. I'm very much pro-officer. It's a matter of efficiency, and you need to get more guys on the street. And you can't with these crazy salaries.
Absolutely. The city has, I think, struck the right number now.
Right.
With the pay being somewhere around 75, 78,000 for an officer with 6 years experience. It's a livable wage. Well, currently, it's if the taxes keep going up, it won't be that livable. But the reality is but my thing is, if the city can put in 4,000 cops every year in the academy and get qualified people, why? It's supply and demand.
We get 40,000 people come to take the test here in Suffolk County. Let me tell you, you lower that salary, you'll still get 30,000 people coming to get 100 slots. Now, I often say as well, listen, I might be tough when it comes to the union negotiation and the crazy salaries, but I'm pro-cop in that it's a really tough job. And a lot of lay people out there don't realize how tough it is. You're dealing with the scum of the earth sometimes. Every day you're battling people who want to spit in your face, who
do spit in your face,
who assault you, and you've got to strike that fine balance. And as soon as, something happens, the media and many of these advocacy groups will be the first ones to blame the cop. And I tend to be a guy who says, give the benefit of the doubt to the police officer. He's trying to do his job. He's trying to protect the rest of society. Now, you're a criminal defense attorney. You've seen a lot of it from the other end. I don't know if you think I'm a little too naive and
No, I don't. I'd say the same thing. I believe that most police officers really try to do a good job. Most. And then, of course, there's always those that are, you have people in every police department that are, vicious and they're mean. We had that guy in New York City with the nightstick, and he brutally assaulted that man. And, so there are always bad apples in any job. But I think for the most part in all police departments, I think they're trying to do the right thing. And I have no problem with the police. They're good guys. My problem is the pay, because I have to pay it,
Right.
And when your taxes are in the 20,000s, it's noticeable.
Well, folks, you're listening to Rich Young from the law firm of Young & Young, a former New York City sergeant and now an attorney out here in Central Islip. Your number again, Rich, is
631-224-7500.
And Young & Young have a show every weekend right here on LI News Radio. If you want to chime into this conversation, we're at 451-1039. Our website is longislandnewsradio.com. You can listen in either there or on 103.9.
I just don't want to pick on, the police pay out here. I mean, a lot of our civil servants are incredibly well paid, and the teachers too, Now since this tax cap went in from Cuomo, they're starting to have they're starting to feel a lot of pain. But, we have to get a handle on this, because we're hemorrhaging our young people. They can't afford to stay here. And, we're losing, our future. I mean, this was one of the greatest places in the world when I grew up in the 60s and 70s. This was the greatest place in the world to grow up.
One of the things that really bothered me about what's going on in the state right now with the budget is they're talking about this gimmicky tax cut, for it's only going to be 2 years if it happens at all, and it's only for districts where they stay within a 2% cap and they consolidate. But they didn't get to the root causes of the tax, and that's spending and the mandates from Albany. That's why we need to have a cap on the arbitration awards. And by the way, the reason the city guys were not paid what the guys out here are, you didn't have arbitration for all those years that you were a city cop. You did not have mandatory arbitration. It did in Nassau and Suffolk, which is why they doubled your salary. Now the police in the city are getting a more a reasonable pay. They were underpaid, but our guys still get the mandatory arbitration, which kicks it to the roof, So, but personnel is 70% of any budget, and unless they curb the mandates with the Triborough Amendment that continues the teacher salaries and for all public employees, their salaries continue and the step increases continue even after the contract expired. That's killing us. Arbitration is killing us. So many of these things are killing us. We are being joined by Tim from Ridge, and you're talking to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, and you also have Rich Young here in the studio. Welcome to the show, Tim.
How you doing, Steve?
Great, Tim. Thanks for
I'm going
joining
to
us.
turn the radio down.
That's it. That's great, or you'll get some feedback.
Hi, Steve. I'm a lifelong Long Island resident, Suffolk County. Calling in because I'm very concerned about the future of Long Island. I agree with what a lot of the gentlemen has been saying. You only have to look to the Newsday the last couple of weeks. Things that are happening to 25 to 35-year-olds are disappearing off Long Island. A school district that you went to, Sachem School District, had a 10% drop in young people. They're talking about closing elementary schools over there. And as a person that grew up in the 60s and 70s on Long Island, I'm very, very upset with our politicians on both sides of the aisle. Because the warning signs have been there for years, Steve.
Yep.
And quite frankly, I don't see anybody really doing anything about it.
I'll tell you, Tim, I had a motto that when I tried to convince legislators to hold the line on spending, all the programs in the world don't mean a hill of beans if you can't afford to live here in the first place. A lot of the programs are dubious at best. Sometimes you get a good program, but there's this tendency in government to placate every special interest that comes through before you. Give me money and I'll solve this problem and that problem. Well, you keep throwing more and more money at it that the taxes go to $10,000, $12,000, $14,000, and you kill the goose that laid the golden egg. And you see it all the time, Rich, with your clients, right?
I see it with my clients. Many of them are moving their companies off of the island. I have some now going around. One's going down. He got an offer from Georgia. They're going to give him land. They're going to give him a building, all for free, if he moves out of Babylon down to Georgia. And he was talking about it. And he's considering it. So there's a lot of people who, are now looking to other states and saying, you know what, I want to get off Long Island. I can't afford to do business.
Not just people, but companies. Tim, did you see Newsday this week? They talked about Entenmann's closing down shop after all of these decades. Adecco, many people don't know what Adecco is. It's one of these, it places people for jobs. It's a huge company on Long Island. They're packing up. They're just going to leave a shell behind. And, these guys are saying, my people can't afford to live here. I can't bring in new talent. And the business taxes are just killing our company. We can go elsewhere and do so much better. Are you seeing it as well with people and businesses Tim?
Absolutely. I work in the supermarket business, Steve, and our customer counts are dwindling on Long Island. And the demographic of our customers is changing to mostly people, and God bless them. Listen, they worked hard. The seniors on Long Island are the ones that can afford to live here the most. Quite frankly, because they get an enhanced credit from STAR, that a working guy like me that has 2 kids in college doesn't get. The guy that lives next door with his wife that's retired on a pension that makes $75,000 a year or less gets an enhanced tax credit from the from the state, and his taxes are $3,000 or $4,000 less than mine. And I got 2 kids in college, and my wife and I are breaking our butts.
Yeah. Well,
like I said, even the tax cap with Governor Cuomo. Great, you put in the tax cap, but it was too little, too late. By the time he got there with the tax cap, my taxes had already gone up 61%.
You
over
got
the
it,
last 10 years.
and now everyone's patting themselves on the back to say, "Oh, well, we only increased taxes by 2%." And hey, it's better than 5% and 7% what it used to be. But when your the base has been raised to $10,000, it's not enough to just say, hey, you're only going up by 2%. We need a radical change here on the island. And some of it is consolidation that they're talking about, but so much of it is getting control of a public cost, and that is personnel. That is, and these costs are out of control.
Once I fear that Detroit is coming, Steve. I don't want to sound too radical on you, but if you start looking around, once your schools start closing, then your communities start to deteriorate. Then the tax base starts to fall. Then you don't need cops. You don't need teachers, the ones that can afford to live here the most. And you end up in a situation where, you're like Detroit. You drive through neighborhoods and you see this thing with the 3-foot growth, and you say, what was that? Well, that used to be a community park.
Tim, I want to
Can't
thank
afford
you.
to maintain it no more.
Great points. We appreciate you calling in. You've been very insightful, and I'm going to just expound on that as we go back to Rich here. Mike Fitzpatrick, who's a very good friend, he's the assemblyman who's carrying the mandate taxpayer relief bill up in Albany that I helped put together with him through the Center for Cost-Effective Government. He says what we need is a Wisconsin moment. The Wisconsin moment meaning a leader like Scott Walker. And there are many people who hate him, from the far left. But he said, we are going off a cliff. We've got to change things radically. He was willing to get his supporters together, push through some major reforms. He faced a recall, won it, is stronger than ever, and Wisconsin is starting to come back.
Oh, they come back big because they have huge surpluses now. They had $1 billion shortfall, and now they have huge surpluses.
We seem to tinker around the edges here.
We just, that's exactly what we do, and the state's putting us deeper in debt. And all of these one-trick gimmicks and these 600 various agencies they use to shell game money between them. I mean, what they do with the Port Authority and all these other agencies is unbelievable. And then you look at some of these like little water districts, and the head of the water district's making $300,000. What are we doing to ourselves?
Yeah, I gotta commend Governor Cuomo for trying to link his tax cut money, which is not a lot of money. It's maybe $200 over a year or two to the average homeowner. It's just for those 2 years, but he's trying to tie it to local governments who will at least show that they're trying to do something to consolidate. I think that's a good idea. We have to do a lot of that consolidation, but the biggest driving factor are the costs that are imposed by these mandates from the state level. I want to shift gears here 1 second too. There was something in the news this week as well, Rich. An officer had been preying on Hispanic drivers.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I thought that was terrible. It was disgraceful.
I'll tell you why it was really terrible. He was a sergeant. He was a police supervisor. Okay, and he was making $178,000 a year, and under the new contract, he would have been at $250,000. It's mind-boggling to me. It's bad enough that a police officer would be doing this, but this is the man who's in charge of making sure the cops are doing it right.
And he's making so much money to put it at risk that way. But I'll say this. What bothered me was, something from an editorial from Newsday and then some other columnist, sort of like painting all officers with the same brush. This guy was an anomaly.
Oh, absolutely.
This guy was a bad egg. Most cops don't do this kind of nonsense.
No.
They're working hard. They're trying to protect the good guys out there. But I knew what they were going to do. They were going to say, look, we told you so. Suffolk County doesn't seriously deal with hate crimes, which is total nonsense, totally unfounded. The police do a great job. In fact, they got this guy. They're dealing with him. They just got the guy who killed that woman and her baby. They got him arrested. They arrested the murderer of Marcelo Lucero. They make the arrest. They do the right thing. It's such a shame that the media continues to paint the whole department with that one bad brush.
Well, Newsday is no friend of any police department, but the bottom line is you're absolutely right. I can't even fathom a police sergeant acting the way this man was acting. I can't even fathom it. And so, like I said, he's a supervisor. He's supposed to be making sure everybody else. And it's hard to become a police sergeant. You got to take a test. It's very demanding. Very few people pass it. A lot of competition. And you know what? Why would you risk your job for a couple $100 here and there?
Well, I just hope people realize that this guy was just an anomaly, one bad app. There's nothing from above when I was ever there, and I don't think it's there now in the new administration, trying to look the other way when this stuff happens. In fact, it's just the opposite. But so Newsday is wrong on that. But I think they are right in highlighting the huge expenses in the department, and hopefully that can provide an impetus for change. We got a few seconds left here. I wanted to get into the whole Kobe Bryant comments because that was amazing, where he said, hey, don't be so quick to assume I'm going to be for or against Trayvon Martin or for or against something on an issue because I'm African American. Very profound statement. We'll get into it in our next session next week. But Rich,
it was a brave statement.
It was very, very brave. People, look out for the Young and Young show on Saturdays at this station, LI News Talk Radio. I want to thank you all for making this a very, very interesting session. We're going to see you back again next week, where we will once again talk about not only national and state issues, but things that are close to home. This is the one station where you can hear about Long Island issues and call in and state your point of view. Thanks, folks. See you next week.